lesson 2 of our statistics unit. This lesson today is going to be discussing the types of groups of people or individuals or objects, or however you want to say it, that we could study in order to properly collect the responses and the answers to our survey question. So for this one, we're going to go over a bunch of different vocabulary words that are very important, but it hopefully will make sense to you guys. So the very first word is called population. Population is, sorry, my pen's not working here. Population is the group of all the individuals, so the big group, okay? And then inside that big group, what we could be doing is we could be studying a smaller group, which is called a sample group. Now, a sample group can be many different things, but in this case here, what typically happens, so I'm just going to try this. What typically happens is you want to create these sample groups in order to be able to have a representation of population, not actually have to ask the entire population, because sometimes your population can be huge. So for example, if I was to ask the entire population of CS&C a question, that would take me a very long time, especially right now. However, if I just go and ask a sample of individuals, so a group of the population of CS&C, for example, just your class, that's a sample of population. The very first type of population, or sample, pardon me, is called a convenience sample. Now, a convenience sample is a group of individuals that I choose from the population that are easy to access. So for example, I do not teach grade 11 or 12, so it would be very difficult for me to connect with grade 11 and 12s at this time, whether I was in a classroom or whether I was teaching you guys online. So what I would do, my convenience sample would be asking a group that is easy to access. So for example, this group of math, I could ask you guys a question and I could get an answer to my survey. It would be very convenient because I already have you guys on Teams, I already teach you, etc., etc. The next type of sample is called a random sample. And random in this case means the exact same thing as it normally means in a typical English language setting. Random just means that everyone has an equal chance of being chosen. There's no rhyme or reason as to why we do it, and there's nothing in place as to how to do it. It just, this is what we're doing. Anyone can be picked at any time. Now, amongst those random samples, there are two types of random samples, which still allows people an equal amount of chance to be chosen. However, it has a little bit of a strategy or a little bit of a system behind it as to how we're going to do it. So the very first one is called a stratified sample. And I look at a stratified sample as being a strategy. So what happens is you take the whole population and you divide it into groups, and then you choose the same fraction of members from each group. So for example, if I was to take grade 9s and I split them into their homeroom, well, not every homeroom has the same amount of students, which means that I'm not picking a specific number of students because that does not represent the same percentage of each group. For example, 2 students from your class particularly is 1/11th of your group. 2 students from my immersion group is actually higher because that is, it would be 1/11th of your class, but 2 students from my immersion group, that's 2/17ths. So that's not the same fraction. So what you would do, instead of choosing a specific number, you choose a specific percentage or a specific fraction, such as 20% of the group. And then you go and find 20% of the group. Which 20%? That's where the randomness comes in. Next type of random sample is called a systematic. Systematic sample. And a systematic sample has kind of a system in place. So it's a little bit different. But basically, you're choosing individuals at a fixed interval from a list. So for example, if I wanted to choose all the grade 9s, but I wanted to just go off of a list of alphabetical order of last names, I wanted immersion or English, it doesn't matter. That would be a systematic sample, because then I would choose every fifth person, let's say, I would ask them the question. So if I have, for example, person 1, 2, 3, 4, and then person number 5 would get chosen. And again, it's going off of a list, and that list would be that I wanted it by order of last name alphabetically. The very last one is called the voluntary response sample. And the voluntary response sample is kind of how you hear it. You are responding to something voluntarily. So you are the one who chooses to answer the question or not. So for example, I'm going to invite the whole class to ask me a question. But if nobody answers me, the whole class to answer me, if nobody answers my question, then that's my voluntary response. If 5 people decide, that's my voluntary response. Another thing you have to be careful with a voluntary response is it doesn't always necessarily represent exactly what the population is thinking. If I have 5 people that are passionate about math class and they answer me, math is my favorite subject, and therefore I believe that everyone thinks math is their favorite subject because nobody else wanted to answer me, that would be a false assumption. But that was the type of assumption I got because of the voluntary response sample. So you have to be careful with those ones. So in the next examples, next few, we're going to identify the population for each, and then we're going to say whether we would talk about whether we would survey, the whole population or just a sample of the population. We need to explain why. So a bicycle store owner wants to know which brand of mountain bike her customers prefer. So who is the population? Well, that is the store's customer. Now, a small store, they might survey all of their customers or all the customers. If it's a small store, you really want to make sure that you're surveying everybody, because then you have a smaller clientele, but you can offer better equipment or better things for them to get them to come back, which is exactly what a small store really needs and what they really want. A larger, busy store would likely survey a sample of customers. And the reason for that is because there's probably so many customers as is that they don't actually need to ask everybody, because asking a sample would be much more time efficient and it would be not as costly. It wouldn't cost them as much, okay? And time consuming and cost, that comes from what we learned in our first example. My apologies, I meant in our first lesson. So question B, the school board wants to know how many hours of homework students do each day. Well, the population is the students in the schools. Now, the school board would likely survey a stratified sample. Now, keeping in mind a stratified sample, stratified. My apologies, guys. Stratified sample of its students consisting of the same fraction of students at various grade levels. because the amount of homework done varies from grade to grade. So you'd want to go with a stratified sample at this point specifically because of the fact that you would then take all of the schools, divvy them up into their grade level, and then you could take a certain percentage of each grade, and then therefore it would be much more efficient in terms of the answers that you would be getting. All right, very last one. A candle manufacturer wants to know how many of its candles are made with flaws. And I love this question because it reminds us that a population doesn't always have to be a person or a group of people. It can actually be an object. So in this case here, the population is all the candles made by the company. All the candles made. A small company, now they might check each candle. Again, they're a small company, probably don't produce nearly as many candles. A large company, they might check every fifth. Okay, or they might consider checking every 10th. It doesn't really matter. That's just an example, every fifth. All that it means is that they're not checking every candle because it would be too costly and too time consuming to check every item. Okay, so that's that. Now for the next example, we're going to start by identifying population or samples. Okay, pardon me. We're going to describe how they would be selected and which type. So in this case here, a teacher wishes to get feedback from her class about the school dance. She plans to survey 5 students of a class of 30. So what could she do? She just wants to know what 5 of them out of the 30 think. So we don't actually really have any rhyme or reason as to how she's going to do that, which means that we could choose the following example. She could put all the students' names in a box and draw 5 names. And then because she's just drawing them, this is a random sample. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It is random at all costs because we don't even know how she would do it. It didn't tell us in the question. So we're giving a suggestion as to how she could do it by doing it by putting the names in all the box and drawing the 5 names. Question B. A telephone company wants to determine whether a fitness center would be well used by its 3,000 employees. The company plans to survey 300 employees. So knowing those numbers, if you kind of put them together, 300 out of 3,000 is actually 10%. And so therefore, the best way to go about this would probably be to do a systematic sample. Okay, and that's the type of sample that you take a list and you pick every whatever number of person. So example, to ensure that the sample fairly represents the population, they might interview every 10th person on the payroll list. And this type of sample is a systematic sample. And that type of sample, it's time and cost efficient. So it doesn't take too much time and it doesn't cost them too much to do it. A chain store is trying to decide whether to open a store in Camrose, Alberta. The company decides to survey people in Camrose and 3 nearby towns. The population of each location is shown in the table. So if you look here, right here, Camrose has 16,000 people. Bashaw, Tewfield, and Daysland, they all have anywhere from approximately 1,000 to 2,000 people. That is anywhere from approximately 16 times to 8 times smaller than Camrose. So therefore, this means that if you're going to survey all these people, you cannot use 20,000, or sorry, not 20,000, 2,000 people from each town. Those kinds of numbers would not be properly represented because then you'd be asking every person in Bashaw, every person in Tewfield, every person in Daylands Queensland, not every person in Camrose, and that doesn't represent it properly. So an example of this would be the company could survey approximately, 25% of the population. As the locations do not all have the same population. And the minute we start talking about a percentage or a fraction, this is automatically a stratified sample. And I don't have another one. That's a lie, I do. Sorry. Ooh, I like that. All right, final one for this page. Marketing research company mails all of the adult residents in the town a survey. The survey asks about brand of consumer products. Residents are asked to mail their responses in a prepaid envelope. Okay, what does that mean? Who are they inviting as their sample? They're inviting all residents to participate. And this is a voluntary response sample. And why is that? Because when it is a voluntary response sample, they are simply asking people if they will respond or not. And people have the option to do so or not. So voluntary response, just a quick little reminder, it's typically when you have to mail something back or something's mailed to you, or if you're like listening to a radio and somebody calls in, that's a voluntary response sample. If you text something into a TV show, whatever it may be, those are all voluntary response samples. And just a reminder, this sample may not represent the population because only those who are interested will respond. And the very final one here. A restaurant owner wants to know the favorite pizza toppings of his customers. So he plans to survey every customer who orders a pizza in his restaurant between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. one evening. Well, this is a convenience sample, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason for that is because these type of people are going to be really easy to access. They're going to be right in his restaurant, and he's not asking somebody who is ordering something else off the menu. He's asking people who order pizzas. So it is not a random sample because of that. If he was asking those who were ordering pastas and salads and hamburgers and whatever else you can think of, what their favorite pizza topping is, well, then that would be considered a random sample because he's asking people who have no potential interest in pizza that evening, or maybe even at all. Who knows? So you want to you want to go with convenient sample because he's asking people who order pizza, and they're really easy to access. So ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you today for this lesson. If you guys have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. And otherwise, good luck with everything, and we will chat soon.